The next thing that I want to work on is this small tag that using a single layout to create several different looks. So let's come back, and after the header h1, let's do another one called header small. And I'm going to set a color of A3, A3, A3. And let's click off, and that's going to give it a nice gray color. And I'm going to absolutely position it. And let me go ahead and write out this code, and I'll explain why. Font size, I'm going to do 14 pixels. And the top, I'm going to set it to 0.63 ems from the top. There we go. And from the left, and remember, this is why I set the header position to relative. That way I created a new positioning context. Otherwise, for instance, if I remove this, it's going to be placed in reference to the window. So if I adjust this, it'll come with us. See? Like so. Okay? So let's come back and add our positioning back to the header. And I'm going to set the left to 203 pixels. And that pushes it over. Okay? And the reason I did that is because I could normally just add the small tag within my heading 1 tag, which is what I would normally do. And then maybe I would set the position to relative and shift it up a few pixels to get it vertically centered. However, I can't do that because I set the text indent of the heading tag to negative 9,000 pixels. So that would have shifted the small tag off as well. So I had to compensate, and there's probably a better way, but just doing this quickly, I used absolute positioning. But yeah, if your logo is a little bit longer, you're going to have to go in here and change that as well. So that's one feature that you could probably work on a few extra minutes and get a better setup. Okay, now let's work on our navigation. So I'm going to do nav, and I'm going to set a background color. Actually, not a background, and background image, and it's going to be images/navbg.png. And I'm going to repeat it along the x-axis. Now, if you remember, all this is just a black, just a little 5 pixel by 40 pixel filled with black, and then the opacity is brought down to about 50 or 60%. And I'm going to set the overflow to hidden, and I'm going to set the height to 57 pixels. Give it a specific height, and I'm going to display as block. Oh, whoops, that's not right. Sorry, I'm reading from my notes, and as I was reading that, I'm thinking, why did I do that? We do height is 57 pixels, and then the margin is 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 6 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. And let's also add a bit of padding. 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, 31 pixels on the left. Okay? And that just gives a little bit of spacing for the elements. Okay? Let's style the list items now. I'm going to float each list item to the left. That way we get that horizontal display like you see here. And I'm going to set the line height to 57 pixels as well. Now, when you have an element, a parent element at 57 pixels, if we also set the line height, whoops, I have a typo. If I set the line height of one of the children equal to the height of the parent element, it'll essentially vertically center the text on the page like you can see here. So that's a nice little tip. Now let's style the anchor tags. So nav lia, and we're going to set a border right of 1 pix dotted and kind of a whitish color, AAB391. Next, let's do some more padding, and I'll do 0 on the top and 1 em on the right and left. I'm going to set display to block, or maybe not. I'm not sure about that. We may come back to that. And let's set the color of the text to white. Okay? Next, we need to, let me gather my thoughts. I want this anchor tag to line up perfectly with this sub navigation. If you can see here, it's shifted to the right somewhat. And that's because we've added some padding to each list item. So I want to make sure that there's nothing shifting this first anchor tag over. And the way I'm going to do that is by doing nav lia And I'm going to create a class of first that will add to our HTML shortly. And I'm just going to set the padding left to 0. And that will remove it. But you're not going to see any difference yet because I haven't added that to our HTML. But just keep that in mind as we move along. Okay, next we're going to work on the banner. That's that big, pretty dark blue with the blue radial gradient. And the height of that is 243 pixels. I'm just going to hard code that in. That's okay. And we're going to set the border top. And this is going to be that light blue. Remember I told you that Collis added that nice border to create the depth. And that's 1 pix solid. And that light blue is 4D688D. 4D688D. Yep. And you can see there it's been added. So let's add our background. And you remember I just cropped out that entire image. And that's images / I saved it as banner bg.png. And I do want it to repeat. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't want it to repeat. And let's just make sure it's in the top left corner, which is somewhat redundant. And now we have this nice section. All right. And remember, we saved it as a PNG, and that's what's giving us this transparency. But in IE6, it's not going to show properly, and you're going to see this nasty gray background. So we'll end up having to add some JavaScript to fix that. But don't worry, it's a 2-minute fix. Okay, I'm going to set the position to relative to create a new positioning context. And I'm going to set the z-index to 2. I'll explain why later. It's not going to become clear just yet. And let's also set a margin bottom just to shift everything down to bring everything up of negative 2.8 ems. And that's going to pull up the main content section. Okay, let's style the about tag, which is right here, this black about, and we are going to use image replacement again. So the margin left, let's move it over. And remember, this is pixel perfect precision. I just measured in Photoshop to see exactly what Collis had done. So the margin left is 247 pixels. I'm going to set a margin right of 226 pixels. The color is going to be EC, which really isn't necessary because we're going to be moving it off the page. But even if the user has CSS, well, really, come to think of it, there's really no reason to add that color because we're moving it away. And if CSS is disabled, they won't see that color anyways. Yeah, so I'm just going to get rid of that entirely. And let's see, what else? Okay, also I'm going to get rid of this margin right because that'll be for the paragraph. I don't need to worry about it being that wide. So let's create another one, banner P, and this will move all of the paragraph information from the right. So if I move over, you can see now it's brought it over. So let's go back to our heading 1 tag, and let's set a margin bottom of 0 pixels because by default heading tags have some top and bottom margin. And I'm going to add some margin top and declare it at 46 pixels. So if you want, you can rewrite this as one style to save some space. And you can see here I've lined up the top edge of our heading perfectly with this dotted line, and that's important. All right. Let's set text indent to negative 9,999 pixels again because we're using image replacement. And I'm going to set the background to URL images / about heading, which is how I saved that transparent pink. And no repeat. Okay, and that brings it in just nicely. But just to be sure that all browsers display all of it, I'm going to specifically state the width and height. And the width of that image is 134 and the height is 34. Because maybe, I believe on Safari, some of this image can be clipped off. Okay, so that looks good for a heading tag. Let's go back to our paragraph tag again now. And I need to, as well, shift the margin about 247 pixels as well. And that lines it up perfectly with our heading. And I'm going to set the color to EC. Okay, that's kind of a nice whitish gray. And the font size will be 18 pixels. And I'm going to just set a little bit of a margin top of 0.8 ems. There we go. Looks pretty good. So now that takes care of our banner. If I zoom out a little bit more, you can see we are getting this layout quite nicely, and it's really not that tough. The main thing we're focusing on are these background images and lining everything up perfectly. All right, so now let's work on our main, which houses the main content and the navigation. So let's do main, which is the wrapping div, create a new positioning context. Let's deselect all that text. And position is relative, and the background is URL images/main bg.ping. And I'm going to repeat along the y-axis. Okay, so to explain to you what this main BG is it is the full width of this site. So that's 920 pixels by about 10 pixels. And I simply just grabbed this whole section right here, cropped off a small section and saved it, and then I tiled it vertically. And that's going to, it was just a quick way of setting up the background for the main content. And I'm going to add some padding at the bottom just to give it some space away from the text, and that'll be 4 ems. And once again, this is how Carlos set it up. So he added lots of spacing, things I wouldn't necessarily think of. He focuses on, and that's what makes him so talented. Okay, let's work on the secondary div. That's the sidebar, if you remember. And I'm going to float it to the left, obviously. The width is going to be 200 pixels wide. And what else? Let's set a padding on the top of 2 ems. And the background is, remember, we need to add that second triangle. So I saved that, and we're going to position it absolutely at the top of this div. So the background is going to be images/secondary triangle is how I called it. .jpg. No repeat. And I want it about -1 pixels from the left and 0. To be honest, I don't know why I had to shift it -1 pixels, but for some reason it was overflowing. So probably when I saved it, it came up just a little bit. And there you go. That's what we end up with. If you can see right there. So we get that nice triangle layout. Okay, let's zoom back out. And we've got so much of our layout now. Let's just work on it a bit more and get it complete.